Welcome to Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, we focused on where data come from and whether we can trust how they were collected. Chapter 2 shifts to the next part of this process. Once we have data, how do we organize and display them so we actually understand what they show? The goal is not to memorize every graph or build every display by hand. Remember, you have statistical tools like StatCrunch for things like that. The goal instead is to choose the graphs that fit the data and help tell the story clearly. The big idea in this chapter is that raw data do not usually explain themselves. Tables and graphs help us see patterns, compare groups, and understand the distribution of data. Technologies like StatCrunch or Excel can handle much of the construction work, but you still have to make some statistical decisions. You have to decide what kind of variable you have, what question you are trying to answer, and which display communicates the data most clearly. For qualitative data, the values are categories. We often summarize these categories with frequencies or relative frequency tables, and then display them with graphs. A bar graph is usually helpful when we want to compare one category with another. A pie chart is more helpful when we want to show how categories make up parts of a whole. The important point is not just which graph looks nice. The point is whether the graph matches the purpose. For quantitative data, the values are numbers. Here we are usually interested in the distribution of data. Displays such as dot plots and histograms help us look for shape, center, spread, and unusual values. A dot plot can work well for small data sets, and a histogram is often better for larger numerical data sets because it groups values into intervals. With a histogram, look at the whole distribution, its shape, where the data cluster, how spread out they are, and whether anything unusual stands out. Chapter 2 also introduces some other displays. Some are more useful later in the course than others. Just as an example, I've pulled out here the time series plots. These are worth noticing because we see them often in media, and they help us look at how a variable changes over time. The main idea is that different questions call for different displays. And a big takeaway from this chapter is that the type of data should guide the display. If the variable is qualitative, we usually want to compare categories or show parts of a whole. And if the variable is quantitative, we usually want to show the distribution of numerical values. Different displays are better suited to different types of data. Choosing the wrong display can hide the story in the data or make the data harder to interpret. So that's Chapter 2 in a brief overview. Your interactive homework assignments will walk you through the specific tables and graphs, including the details of how these are constructed and interpreted. As you work, there are two things I want you to note. First of all, use the technology. Second, return to this question: what can I see when I organize and display the data? Good graphs help us see patterns, make comparisons, and tell the story of the data more clearly.